series. So I think it's appropriate to tell you what a terrific person before we get into one of the most important topics of all of our lives, and that is our time and how we spend it. But I do think it's appropriate for me to give a little shout out to a dear friend and of course the founder of Project Inspire, to tell you what type of person Rabbi Chaim Samson really is. A very dear friend. I mentioned to Rabbi Samson that about 4 or 5 months ago I had the honor of being the MC for the Red Cross dinner with Jay Leno, and as we moseyed through the virtual auditorium, if you will, the coordinator of the Red Cross, said, Anthony, this is Cynthia Gam, who of course is the founder of MADD, a Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And I happen to mention to Rabbi Samson, as a public speaker, a person on the speaker circuit, that it's such a terrific thing when the organizer makes that introduction, breaks the ice, makes the speaker feel so terrific. So not to be outdone, before we began this evening, Rabbi Samson says to me, Rabbi Gordon, I don't know if you know Robin Gam, who of course is the founder of DAM, Mothers Against Dyslexia. So that's just the kind of person that Rabbi Samson is, just making me feel terrific, and I couldn't but not avoid that shout out. So welcome. Probably the most important topic in all of our lives, because we have a finite amount of this commodity, and that's time. Let's firstly talk about how important is time from a Torah perspective. The answer clearly is it's very important. How do we know that? Firstly, the first mitzvah in the Torah is Rosh Chodesh, which is the counting of the new moon. So the concept of time, of counting, is really the very, very first mitzvah that the Almighty memorializes in the Torah. If we want to take the end of the bookend, and that's when we end this journey, we get an open book exam in the next world, and we are told one of the questions is, how did you spend your time in terms of your commitment to learning Torah? Did you make a specific time to study Torah? There's no question that time is a vitally important concept. So important is the concept of time, my friends, that the Torah starts with Bereshis bara Elokim es. The fourth word of the Torah is an Aleph and a Taf, which is the first and the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And our commentators teach us that's a hint to the fact that the Almighty created time. The importance for our purpose is not only that time is very important, but also the fact that if the Almighty created time, perforce He's outside time, which means for us that He knows what's going to happen in our future. In fact, one of the names, as we know, of the Almighty is past, present, and future. And so the concept of the fact that God is guiding us is implicit in the fact that He knows what's going to happen in the future. Let's begin our journey together. This, my friends, is an hourglass, showing you very graphically the passing of time. So let's go back to some statistics. If the average American has a lifespan of 80 years, which is 28,835 days, let's break that up in terms of how the average person spends their time. The average person spends 8,477 days sleeping, 1,635 days eating, 3,201 days working, 1,999 days commuting, 2,676 days on some kind of a recreational activity, 1,576 days shopping, 720 days, if we take it cumulatively, involved in community activities. We spend, my friends, 671 days of our lives in the bathroom. Finally, 576 days we are involved in some form of chesed or benevolent act, which means, my friends, out of the 28,835 days that we all have of this journey called life, if we take out those items that I just articulated, we have only 7,363 days to fulfill our respective missions in this world. I think it's safe to say that the goal, therefore, must be, what's the most judicious way to spend these 7,363 days? And perhaps the subtext can be, why is it that most people feel that their life is a continual rush and they never really finish most of what they set out to do? The first nugget of wisdom I'd like to share with you in answering that question is because from a secular perspective, most people think of time in the form of a clock. What I'm going to encourage each and every one of you to do is rather to think of your life in terms of a compass. By so doing, one of the first things that I would like you to take to heart is that while most people prioritize their schedules, people who use their time judiciously schedule their priorities. Let me say that again. Most people, and in fact, most time management courses underscore the concept of prioritizing the schedule. Productive people rather schedule their priorities. In order to understand this, perhaps the most productive time management matrix that I've seen in studying time management over many years is that produced by the late Dr. Steve Covey. What Dr. Steve Covey put together was a matrix which divides the horizontal and vertical side of the page into 4 quadrants. The top left quadrant are items that are important and urgent. The next quadrant to the right is items that are not urgent but are important. The third quadrant on the left are items that are not important and urgent. And the last quadrant in the bottom right-hand side are things that are not important and not urgent. My friends, I'm sure you won't be shocked to learn that most people spend their time in the 4th quadrant pursuing things that are not important and are not urgent, or are not important and are urgent, meaning they spend their entire life putting out fires, their entire life in reactive crisis mode. If you want to fulfill your life goals, if you want to have a productive journey called life, I'm going to ask you to try and focus on spending 80% of your time in the quadrant that is items that are important but not urgent. Let me illustrate this by an experiment that was done in 1952 at the University of Paris. Picture the scene. Professor walks in, puts on the table a vase, a number of rocks, and next to the rocks he put some gravel, and next to the gravel he put a pile of sand. He challenged the class to put those items into this vase without displacing the water. This is a top business school in Paris, and none of the students could somehow get the rocks, the gravel, the sand into this vase, or into this jar, if you will, without displacing the water. What the professor did, without opening his mouth, was he took an empty jar. He first put the rocks in, he then put the gravel in, then the sand, and then poured in the balance of the water. Nothing was displaced. What's the life lesson for all of us who are trying to live Torah observant lives and use our time judiciously? My friends, the call for all of us is to put the big rocks in first. Figure out, what are the big rocks in your life? Your family, your significant other, your health. Putting the big rocks in first ensures that you will not be in reactive crisis mode and trying to balance things that by definition are going to cause the wheels to come off. Another way of perhaps saying this, my friends, is keep the main thing the main thing, as opposed to getting caught in the thick of thin things. So my friends, in order to use our time judiciously, we said point number one, instead of prioritizing our schedule, we are going to schedule our priorities, and more specifically, we're going to put the big rocks in first. Point number two, in order to use this commodity that the Almighty created called time in the most judicious way, is get rid of distractions. One of the biggest challenges of living in a world where there's been a proliferation of technology, and I'd like to dispel a few myths because we don't get a second chance to use this gift called time. This is not a dress rehearsal. Myth number one that I'd like to dispel is there is no such a thing as multitasking. There is a plethora of research that says unequivocally that the Almighty created the neurological process, the brain, that we cannot possibly bifurcate our focus, and we cannot possibly be thinking about two things contemporaneously and do justice to both. The importance of making sure that we don't seem busy, but rather are productive, is do one thing at a time, do it well, and be in the moment. Myth number two, which again has become a common concept of the millennial generation, people like myself, ages of late 19 to the latter part of 20s, is the concept of FOMO, fear of missing out. So my friends, I'm here to tell you that most people spend money they don't have to buy things they don't need to impress people they don't like. And the people that they are trying to placate and people that they are trying to not miss out of are people that are not even going to be part of these big rocks. Let's review. We start off by saying that time is a very, very important concept from a Torah perspective. We said that the Almighty created time, and we see that in the fourth letter of the Torah. We see that the first mitzvah is Rosh Chodesh, once again underscoring the importance of time. And we see the fact that the Almighty tells us He's going to ask us how we used this beautiful concept called time. We then said, why is it that most people seem to be in a total rush, and while they seem to be busy, are not necessarily productive? We said that the reason is because they are thinking of time as a clock instead of as a compass. The concept of a compass is finding out where do you want to be 3, 5, 7 years from now, and focus on the direction rather than the small hand and the large hand. What that means from a graphic perspective is we shared the famous 4 quadrants of Dr. Steve Covey, and we said the most productive people in the world should spend 80% of their time in the top right-hand quadrant, which means spending time doing things that are important but not urgent. Again, the most productive people in this world will spend most of their time in the top right-hand corner focusing on things that are important but not urgent. We said that really means keeping the main thing the main thing. The second point that we raised, my friends, is to get rid of distractions. We underscored the fact that multitasking is a myth. One cannot, by a definition, focus on 2 items and expect not to compromise one's productivity. And then we spoke about the fact that FOMO is a wonderful name for a dog, but it's certainly not a way to look at our lives in a productive way. I'd like to move to point 3 so that we can use our time in this world in the most judicious way. And that is the challenge that we all have of being in the moment. I'd like to share with you an example of 2 emotions, and I'd like you to scream out from wherever you are whether you think that those emotions on the time spectrum are related to the past, the present, or the future. Emotion number 1 would be guilt. Correct, excellent. That clearly is the past. How about remorse? Remorse clearly is renting space in one's head regarding the past. How about fear? Outstanding. So fear clearly is an emotion that is a concern about the future. How about anxiety? Once again, it's a concern about what's going to happen in the future. Sadly, most people don't live in the moment, which means that we are in effect allowing thoughts to live rent-free in our head, and we're not really focusing all of our emotions, our neurological juices, to be in that time that we are supposed to be in. Let me illustrate the power of this concept, if I may. I grew up in South Africa. One of the most beloved and certainly one of the most sagacious Torah scholars in South Africa, sadly, was a victim to a very big tragedy. His son suffered from asthma. I understand that during one vacation, he was in Muizenberg near Cape Town. The father turned around for a few minutes. Apparently the son had an asthma attack in the ocean, and tragically he met his demise. The story goes that this very well-known rabbi literally couldn't break himself away from this depression and blamed himself and perseverated about this incident that happened and couldn't move on with his life until finally he went to Israel and had a meeting with the Chanan. The Chanan was certainly one of the greatest Torah scholars in the recent decades, and the Chanan said to him, and I'm going to paraphrase, that if you don't bury the past will bury you. My friends, there are many people that spend so much of their emotional energy and their concerns living in the past. I want to share with you another story. One of the benefits of being on the speaking circuit and speaking to a lot of people is many people during retreats and workshops come up to the podium afterwards and obviously say, Rabbi, this is the most outstanding speech ever given in the history of the world, which I hear a lot. And then one woman said to me, you know, Rabbi, you cannot believe what he was like. He was toxic. He made me feel like a fool. The way he treated the neighbors, the kids. This carried on for a good 5 to 6 minutes. And clearly I felt she must be describing her significant other. And exactly what I thought. She said, Rabbi, it's horrible. We got divorced. And I cannot believe what it took about 10 minutes for me to realize that she was talking about her ex-husband whom she had divorced 22 years ago. My friends, we just explained how sacrosanct this commodity called time is. How every single millisecond is a gift. Don't rent space on things that you cannot change. The past is a part of the spectrum that you certainly cannot change. What about the future? The Gemara in the tractate Yevamos says very clearly that we are actually proscribed from spending too much time prognosticating or thinking about the future, because as we said at the beginning of this incredibly dynamic lecture, the Almighty is outside time. He's controlling the future, and concerns about the future, in a sense, fly in the face of one's trust in the Almighty himself. So I think this is the time to share with you what I think will be 10 rules which hopefully will change all of your lives. And that's the concept of being able to let go and move forward so one can be in the moment, so that one is not locked into pain and remorse about the past, and one is not renting space in one's head, so one is not like a car driving with the handbrake up. Here's the 10 things, my friends, that you need to move forward and to ensure that you use this commodity called time in the most judicious way. Rule number 1 is letting the opinions of others control your life. Please understand that what other people think of you is none of your business. How many times I've had people say, Rabbi, because this person thinks that, this person did that. My friends, the clock is ticking. The opinions of others is not the best way for you to spend this sacrosanct commodity called time. And number 2, let go of the shame of past failures. One of the, I think, the benefits of speaking to many people, but also from a professional perspective, being surrounded by and representing many famous celebrities and sports people, is I can say with absolute confidence that there's no one that I've met in this journey called life that has achieved greatness without mistakes, missteps, and curveballs that, if they look back, they are very embarrassed about. Let go of the shame of past failures. Point number 3, being indecisive about what you want. Stop being indecisive about what you want. My friends, the road of life is filled with many flat squirrels who couldn't make a decision. There is a number of ways that one can quantify things to work out which way to tip the scales. It's going to be a topic of another class. But being in this limbo is one of the worst ways to burn through this special commodity called life. Point number 4 is stop procrastinating on goals that matter to you. My friends, once you understand that something's important, that that's something that you want to actualize and be part of your legacy, every minute, every second that goes by before you start executing on your plan is precious time wasted. Point number 5, it's a huge mistake to choose to do nothing. By definition, doing nothing is making a decision by default. Decisions are not easy to make. Again, we are going to speak about how to make decisions in a separate class, but the idea of flooding yourself with working out which way to go and being stuck is one of the ways that we can waste this precious commodity called time. The 6th thing you need to let go of, my friends, is let go of the notion that you always need to be right. Productive people, people that you want to use this commodity called time judiciously, focus on wanting peace, of wanting not necessarily to be right, but wanting to be loved and to love. The 7th thing that I would like to suggest that you need to let go of is running from problems that should be fixed. The carpet, my friends, is getting very lumpy from things that are swept under it. If there's an issue, if there's a problem, don't spend, again, a precious time trying to figure out what needs to be fixed. Stop running, stop perseverating, make the decision, move on. The 8th point that you need to let go of in order to live a productive life and use time judiciously is to stop making excuses rather than decisions. Productive people make decisions. People that generally are not living the way one can and are not actualizing their potential are making excuses instead of making decisions. The penultimate point that I'm going to suggest that you let go of is overlooking the positive points in your life. There's a force that the Almighty created which tries to bear down on us. The Meister Satan, the Sitra Achra, whatever you want to call it. If you want to use this commodity called time judiciously, focus on your positive points, focus on your traits, focus on the unique tools that you have, as opposed to the points that you would have, could have, and should have had. And the last point that you need to give up in order to move forward, to use your time judiciously, is not appreciating the present moment. We all know the cliche that the concept of the present is really a gift. I'd like to tie this all together for the first part of our time together by quoting what I believe is one of the most accurate prayers. It's a prayer that anyone who's familiar with the 12-step program will recognize. It's called the Serenity Prayer, and I believe it encapsulates everything that we've discussed today. The Serenity Prayer, my friends, is as follows. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Spending time thinking about what could have, would have done if you cannot change it is criminal. If you can change it, do so and move forward. And studying Torah hopefully will sharpen your clarity to have the wisdom to know the difference. My friends, we all get a certain amount of this precious commodity. We've discussed today the concept of a compass and not a clock. We've discussed today keeping the main thing the main thing. We've discussed today the importance of getting rid of distractions. We've discussed being in the moment. We outlined 10 points that you need to get rid of in order to use this commodity called time productively. I'd like to end this evening by saying, go out and live every single day as if it's your last, because one day it will be. Good evening and thank you.